What is going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pod Scum. This right here, as you should all know by now, is the podcast where we dive into the deep, dark, murky waters with a plethora of legendary guests. I am, of course, your host, your bastard of ceremonies, the number one scumbag, Rex Ruger. That's REXXX. You might also know me as AKA the King of Sleaze, AKA the Hair Metal High Priest, and most importantly, AKA Diamond David Lee Roth Jr. Take a look, folks. You know it. I know it. My lawyers know it. That you are looking at the son of glam, the front man for the band. Just smoked a few grams. I got a million fans. I'm your ice cream man. Mr. Wop Boppa Loo Boppa Wop Bam Bam Shazam. Hot damn. Woo! I am feeling good. Everybody in the house, of course, including you all out there, is looking good. It is, of course, made possible by my favorite product. You want the quaff like Roth? Get you some. Coming to you, as always, from the lush lavender lounge of love, where it all goes down. Joined, as always, by Keith Hernandez Puppet, who may or may not be texting me some questions for our guest today. He does do that from time to time on the sly. Amazing, I know, that a puppet can text. But that's Keith Hernandez. Come on. Number 17 in your programs, number 1 in your hearts. This is, of course, the No Frills podcast. As you can see me inviting my guest. I'm lame with technology, folks. What can I say? I can't give you frills, but I can give you thrills. And that is looking at this kisser. So you're welcome, folks. And I am excited about today's guest. I've been perusing his book, reading his audio book. We will talk more about that when he comes on here. Very excited to have him. Been looking forward to this for quite a while. A guy that I would say has seen and done it all. You know, I mean, it's all old hat for him, much like it is for a rock and roll legend frontman like myself. So it's essentially going to be a convo here with a couple of legendary frontmen kind of, you know, battering it back and forth, so to speak. So should be fun, should be interesting, should be informative, all that good shit. It will be. So just waiting for him to get in here. While we are waiting, let me remind you of Love Sword, of which I am the front man, and I'm looking for players. Nobody seems to have the cojones. Is that how you say it, Keith? He is Cuban, Mexican, whatever the hell you are, Keith. Nobody seems to have the cojones to want to try to get in this band with me. Now, I know I put a lot of pressure on people. I am looking for virtuoso level players or above. And I don't even know what the hell above virtuoso level even is. But I'm looking for players. And if you're not too scared, get at me. I mean, come on, folks. What do I got to do to put together a band in today's day and age? Everybody's out there making goddamn music. But Love Sword remains inactive. The greatest frontman, sorry, Pops, second greatest frontman to ever do it is sitting around inactive. This face is not being seen by the masses. And let's face it, it needs to be. So, that being said, I mean, I don't know what more I can do. So, just got a message from my guest. He said give him 2 minutes or less. So I will go into my rap here. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go back and peruse all the old interviews and the old content because there are gems in there. I consider them all gems. All people that I respect and admire for their talents, and certainly am grateful for the fact that they came on here and chopped it up with me. So I think as of the recording of this episode, right now, there are 103 episodes of Pod Scum out there in the ether. And by ether, I mean YouTube. So please, by all means, go check them out. But more importantly, like and subscribe because there are plenty of more kick-ass interviews yet to come. And I don't want to, you know, tip my hand, so to speak, and divulge too much, but got some good surprises in store. The interviews are just going to keep getting bigger and better. You know, this is still very in the very early embryonic stages. I have only been posting interviews and or doing the podcast for 8 months. So, I mean, we've really come a long way. That's because of the people out there that have already subscribed. So if you already have, much love and appreciation for your support. Glad you guys are digging the interviews and liking what you see and hear. And trust me, if you're on board already, it's only going to get better. That I can promise you. As a matter of fact, at the time of this recording, I just spoke to a friend of mine who's assisting and helping me put together a very big interview. Very big. Metalheads will rejoice. You will be excited. You will be, up in arms. You will be giddy. All that good shit. So, again, I want to send out a special thank you to all the people that have previously been guests on here. People that are giving me lots of support. Personal friends of mine. Just, you know who you are. The people that are lifting me up and really being supportive and, giving me kudos, for the interviews and, reaching out to me in the comment section and just giving me words of encouragement, telling me how much they dig the interviews. So, hearing all that stuff is always fucking awesome. And, I will digress now because our guest is here. So let's chop it up with him on PodScum and let's do it.
Hey.
John KIM FAYE. John, listen, man, I don't know. Do I add the Kim or do I not add the Kim?
It depends on how authory you want to make me sound in that moment.
Yeah, because I think you do sound more authory when you have 3 names. That does help.
It definitely helps, yeah. But you
have written a book. People will know you as an author, but first and foremost, people will know you as the how do I put this? I mean, the CAULFIELDS really is your thing, right? I mean, yes, you had band members, but you were the primary songwriter and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to confess full on right here, man. And for people, fans of the CAULFIELDS out there, you can weigh in certainly in the comment section on your opinion, but I love the L album more than Whirligig. How do you like that?
I appreciate that, and you're not alone.
Okay, good.
Too.
You do too. I didn't want to take a tongue lashing, but for as hooky and catchy as the songs are on Whirligig, it seemed to be a little more guitar driven and a little more rock oriented on the L album. Was that a conscientious decision, or did the songs just come out that way?
I think we were just improving as a band, and we knew more of what we wanted and who we were when we made the second record. You just got to go through those experiences where you're kind of like discovering yourself. We were in our 20s, let's not.
Right.
So
That's true.
We were young fellas at that point. And plus, the guy that everyone knows as the drummer in the CAULFIELDS, Richie Rubini, he didn't join the band until the first album was done.
Okay.
So he did all the touring with us. And then when it came time to make the second record, we were much more of a well-oiled machine by that point, I think.
Right.
And his input and influence goes far beyond being the drummer. I mean, he's a great producer, multi-instrumentalist. He's an idea man. So a lot of the real magic moments that happened on that second record, I credit him with a lot of those, the ideas for those.
Now, what's the impetus? Lots of people in the rock world, obviously, are penning their memoirs, and yours is an extremely good one. And I got it a little bit on it late, so I wanted to actually have it finished before I talked to you, but had some eye problems in the last year, so I'm really leaning on these audiobooks a lot. One thing that you did, though, that I really love, though, is you narrated your own audiobook. I love when people tell their own story in their own words. There's no other way to do it.
Look, I think if it's a memoir, you have to.
Yeah.
If you're a fiction writer, I can see hiring a voice actor to do it and that kind of thing. But it totally made sense to me to do it on my own, and it was not an easy process. I'll be honest with you. I recorded the whole thing by myself once through, and I trashed it because it was just not up to par. So I ended up hiring a friend and a fellow musician who's a great audio engineer to kind of act as my producer, and it's so much better
Well, and I even appreciate the little subtle nuances. Obviously, you do some a cappella singing in it, but I even noticed last night when I was listening to a particular chapter that you even addressed somebody opening a soda, and you even had the can sound opening.
Yes,
and as somebody who's listening to audiobooks, that's really appreciated, though. It really is.
We were very into the idea of that, like those little extra. Joey, my producer, called it extra immersion moments. Yeah. And so there aren't, it's not like littered all throughout the book. It's just like a handful of little instances where that happens, where I think it's just like kind of effective and it's cool. And, you know, we also have like two sort of like dumb 15-second songs that we made up as just to be, you know, just to have more fun with it. And I think that hopefully that spirit kind of comes through in the whole book, you know.
Yeah. Now, one thing I'm really interested in, though, when I was making notes about stuff to talk to you about, other than a singer, songwriter, producer, all that kind of stuff, you also, for a while, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're not doing this anymore, but you were teaching songwriting at Drexel University?
Yes, I was the songwriting prof at Drexel for 16 years.
And now, when you sit down and you have a classroom of people and you're teaching them how to write a song, how to write a great song, and you've written many of them, and catchy songs, memorable songs, which I think is the mark of a great song. But if you could boil it all down to one thing, and and boil the curriculum down to one thing, what is the thing that you tell people? Here's what makes a great song.
Well, here's how I approached it, because anybody can learn the nuts and bolts of what is a verse, what is a chorus, what are these things. You can teach those mechanics, but what I really wanted people to come away from my class is I put so much focus on, you got to tap into your voice, like who you are as a person, and how that is going to come, how your experiences, your emotions, whatever is going into that song has to come from a place that a lot of people aren't honestly willing to tap into. There's a lot of sort of surface vulnerability that's not true vulnerability,
right?
That I really and I have songs that I've written throughout my career that I think were examples of that. So I would literally just play those songs,
right,
and wait for one or two of them to ask if I was okay. and then we would talk about how do you get to that place. So it was much more than the mechanics of like how to, and we did obviously, it's a college course, so you have to like have a curriculum, and obviously melody writing, lyric writing, those kinds of things were part of it. But it always circled back to, I would say to them, like, I would sooner hear a song where you're being real honest with me, and maybe it's not as, mechanically perfect as someone else's, trite, pop song that does all the quote unquote right things. I would rather hear something that's real, that's coming from you. And I think over 16 years, I would say 85% of the kids I taught really took that to heart, which is not a bad percentage.
No, not at all. But is it hard in this day and age, though, with obviously, since the Caulfield started out in the 90s, I don't need to tell you that the music industry has changed leaps and bounds with these streaming platforms. The formula is not as easy as it was to make it in the industry anymore. Record labels, all that kind of stuff, big contracts kind of becoming, pretty obsolete. So like, what would you tell people nowadays who would want to pick your brain for how to get their band catapulted to the next level in the industry, in today's music industry?
Well, to be honest with you, I politely bow out of giving that advice, because I don't exist in that music industry, man. Like, that's not like, I'm in a whole nother world at this point. I mean, I've, like everybody, like, I'm still doing music, so I have to sort of be in the mix with all that's going on. And I've pretty much embraced a lot of the things. Like, it's a singles culture, so I put singles out on Spotify and stuff like that. I have no idea what's going on with TikTok, and it's not my favored medium in any way at all.
Me neither.
I've dabbled, and I throw stuff out there and see if any, but my whole point is, I think that what I can contribute to a young artist is to give them an example of someone who has sort of seen all sides of the music business. I mean, I've been an independent artist again for a lot longer than I was on A&M Records.
Right.
I've still, I'm 15 albums in right now.
Right.
So I have maybe the secret sauce to longevity and happiness, maybe, and that's not the same as, giving somebody the keys to, becoming a rock star at this point in time. But so I think that's where my contribution can be.
In your opinion right now, though, and certainly rock history has been obviously, littered with, tons and tons of great, rock characters and rock, gods, so to speak. Will we ever see those kind of people again? You know what I mean? Like, will we see like, a Prince or a Michael Jackson or a Robert Plant or even a Bruce Springsteen, in this modern group? Or has that era kind of came and went?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on like what it is about that group you're talking about, like somebody who feels larger than life.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I look, I am not a 20-something person, but there's a lot of music that's being made today that I find extremely compelling.
Yeah.
There's a female supergroup called Boy Genius, who I don't know if you've heard. It's Phoebe Bridgers, Lucy Dacus, and Julian Baker, and they're all great singer-songwriters and artists in their own right, and they've come together to make this. And so I think for that generation, especially for young women who are looking for role models, they're pretty larger than life.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And so I don't kind of view it as, will there ever be, for me it would be like, can the Beatles exist again, or
right.
And I just think that as times change, you have to sort of pass the torch to whoever is, the age that we were when all the artists that, like there will never be another Prince in my opinion.
Right.
But there are some talented motherfuckers out there that they just have to, they got to find their own way to become that in a world that's very different from the one that Prince became what he became in,
Yeah.
But for me, I'm very encouraged by the fact that real organically made music is a thing again, because you go through these cyclical phases where it seems like, the consciousness is fixated on kind of like bullshitty, not so good music. And I think that just from the circles I hang out in, and a lot of the people I hang with these days are considerably younger than me, because my fellow 50-somethings are not going out to clubs and seeing new bands and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And rock and roll is very alive. Like I live in the Philly area, and I go out and see new bands that are in their 20s, and they are awesome.
Yeah.
Like they're, and quite frankly, a few of them remind me of like the bands that I loved as a teenager. I saw this one band last week that the guitar player looked like Andy Partridge from XTC, and the sound just had that like 1979, 80 raw kind of excitement. And so I personally, like, I feel very encouraged by like all of the young artists that I witness. And so I think it's a good, I think it's a good thing. I mean, they're having to exist in a world that I don't know that I even would have had the fortitude to deal with.
Right.
You know what I mean? We were allowed to grow.
Sure.
We were allowed to develop.
Yeah.
Now
and people also had an attention span back then. It kind of seems like, like everyone's kind of got to, hey, show me your best shit right now, or I'm moving on. I mean, there's got to be a lot of pressure.
You would at least get 30 seconds from somebody. Yeah, you get 2.3.
Yeah, now you get 2.3. So I'm really interested, and I'm really, my hat's off to you. The book is really great, but I'd like to dive in a little bit deeper to your upbringing, because when I was growing up, I had a very dear friend of mine whose family was from Laos. Very strict upbringing. I'm wondering, when you want to go into the arts field, and I had another Asian American musician on here from a band called Heaven's Edge. They were kind of a hair metal band. His name is Reggie Wu. Yes, and
they're from Philly, so I know.
Yes, and he did say that his parents in typical Asian American fashion, wanted him to be a doctor. Were your parents as embracing of the idea of you getting into the arts entertainment field?
Well, okay, so let me give you a little context. So my mother was Korean, my father was Irish.
Right.
Father passed away when I was very young, which means that I was raised in a household with a working Korean mom who was a doctor, and I had 3 older sisters who basically looked after me. So being the last kid in someone's lineage, I think you get a little more, well, you know, like, I'm exhausted. Do whatever the hell you're going to do.
Anyway, yeah.
So I would say that while I had a definite sense that my mother was concerned for the path that I was taking, because she just, you know, all she wanted was the best for me, and she just wanted me to be okay and be able to live.
Right.
She was aware that I picked a very hard way to try to do that. And so her concern was always there. She never said to me, I want you to be a doctor, or I want you to be this. In fact, because I assumed that she thought those things, that, you know, like when I got to college, I unilaterally majored in business because I thought that's what would make her happy. When in fact, she didn't give a fuck.
Right.
You know? And it was only until I almost failed out of that major, because I have no business being that in business. Right. I was like, Mom, I failed a class. Like, it was a class called finite math, which to this day I have no idea even what it is.
Yeah,
I've completely flagged it.
You so far have made it to this point in your life without needing finite math.
Correct.
Yeah, as have I.
There you go.
Yeah.
But I failed the class, and I was like, Mom, I got to switch to something that I can do. So I became an English major, which made a lot more sense.
Yeah.
And it allowed me to not only thrive academically, but it also allowed me to focus on music, which is really why I was in college in the first place, because everybody in my band, which the band that eventually became the Caulfields, was going to University of Delaware. So that's basically, like, I always had my eye on, well, what about the band? Like, how can I make sure that stays in place?
Yeah. So you mentioned Delaware, and you just previously mentioned, your mother was Korean, your father Irish. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that I read that, and I don't know what year you were born in, but didn't they very much frown on interracial marriages in Delaware up till a certain year?
Well, quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
So I was born in '66. My parents, we did not live in Delaware until after I was about 3.
Okay.
But came to learn that there were still laws in 16 states in the country that, like, basically made it illegal to have an interracial marriage. Wow. And Delaware was one of them.
Wow.
So it wasn't until '67 when a Supreme Court case called Loving versus Virginia ruled that those laws were unconstitutional and they had to be wiped from the books. But Delaware was kind of standing firm with that shit for a little too long.
Yeah, they sure were. Jesus, come on, Delaware. Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean,
they don't like to be reminded of that. When
I
go home to Delaware and say this kind of stuff, they don't like to hear that.
Well, I mean, it's not a great look for them. I'll tell you that.
Bad luck, real bad luck.
Very bad luck. So your father passes away, and you're how old?
I'm 6.
Okay. So a lot of remembrances of him.
Yeah, I mean, for as old as or as young as I was, I think I have a lot of pretty strong memories of him. I mean, primarily it kind of feels in my brain that, before he died, I was kind of like blissfully oblivious, not aware that I was looked at as different.
Right.
My dad was by all accounts, like, very proud to show me off. Probably in part because he was like, hey, I'm 62 years old and I had a kid. So he knew he wasn't.
Yeah.
And
there was a big age difference. and correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a big age difference between him and your mother, correct?
That's correct. She
was
40, he was 62. So, and obviously that indicates that I probably was not intentional.
Right.
But after he passed away, and you kind of, I kind of in retrospect, understand that he was somewhat of a barrier or a shield for me in terms of being exposed to like the kinds of things that were said and done to me after I was just an Asian kid walking around in Newark, Delaware, without a white father to somehow give people context or whatever it is that it would give somebody to shut their mouth. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I view like his passing and everything after that until a certain point to be like a very kind of cataclysmic change in my life and how I navigated the world and how I was treated in the world growing up. And in a lot of ways, I feel like my whole entry point into music has to do with my sense of A, loneliness, B, lack of identity, knowing who I was. When you're mixed race, you don't have the benefit. Like if you're, say you're just like a, any other kind of minority that's just one thing. Right. You kind of know who you are, even if it's somebody who's looked down upon or treated poorly. You have a sense of what that is. When you're two different things, and those things on the surface don't seem to have a lot in common. Yeah. You on the one level, that you're both, and on a more visceral level, you feel like you're neither. So I never felt particularly connected to being Korean, never felt particularly connected to being Irish or white, because people who were in either of those camps looked at me as like, oh, well, you're not this enough to be one of us. Yeah. But I was, it's like you're not enough and you're too much.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I get that. Yeah. And I'd like to get your opinion on this. Now, obviously, I just mentioned that I've had Reggie on here, and I certainly know of other Asian Americans in the music industry. But you must admit, there's not really a lot. Why don't they get into the arts and entertainment field as much? Is it because there's a lot of strict upbringing, and they aren't pushed towards that or encouraged to get into that?
And I think that's a really good question, and and again, you mentioned Reggie, and then you can mention me, and then you could maybe mention, I mean, this is just from like that era of music. Yeah. There's obviously a lot more now. Yeah. But for that time period, there's me, there's him, there's the guy from Big Head Todd. Yeah.
Loudness. The guys in Loudness.
Right. Yeah. But that's kind of a different thing. Like I kind of like make a distinction between like just Asian people. I mean, Loudness, like, the word Japanese metal precedes that band.
It does. They're identified.
Shonen Knife, which was an all-female Japanese band. It's like they're clearly not American.
Right.
I'm talking about Asian Americans.
Okay.
That you can literally count on one hand.
Yeah.
Especially in rock.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that now in 2023, because the floodgates have opened in a lot of other realms, like film and TV, for example, and lots of great Asian actors and that kind of thing. And more Asians in music, but it's kind of like, it's still a situation where you need to be told somebody's half Asian, because you wouldn't assume that like Bruno Mars is half Filipino, or Anderson .Paak is half Korean.
Right.
They just look like mixed race African American people.
Right. Yep, they do. Yep.
So it's still really kind of like an outlier to be Asian American and be in that world.
Yeah.
And as far as my explanation for why that is, I think some of it might be cultural, but I also think that when there's no representation, there's just less, you got to try to be inspired by stuff. And people. Right. I've been really lucky to, get some reactions for the book from a couple of Asian American musicians from the Philadelphia area who I didn't even really know thought about me in this way. But like, one guy was like, because of seeing me on stage back in the day, it did show him that it could be a possibility for him.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I had zero representation. Like I got into rock and roll for a lot of different reasons, but one was not that I saw somebody that looked like me doing what I was doing.
Right. Right.
You know, my heroes were primarily British guys.
Right. Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
So I was actually, as a teenager, I was a huge Anglophile. You know, I like lived for Monty Python and
yeah.
you know, lived for like all things British.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the band, the Clash, the Jam, Buzzcocks, XTC,
Yeah.
Elvis Costello, Squeeze, Joe Jackson. All of these guys are English.
Right. So at what age does rock music really get its hooks into you, and who would have been that first artist that really got you excited or that resonated with you?
Well, I think it's a process that happens in phases, because as a little kid, I mean, my sisters were big music fans.
Yeah.
And they had a record collection. So obviously, like any younger sibling is going to absorb everything their older siblings are listening to. And they were teenage girls in the late 60s and early 70s. So they listened to the Beatles. They listened to stuff like Carole King, and they listened to James Taylor, and, you know, so singer-songwriters, you know, bubblegum 45s, those kinds of things. When I'm a little bit older, but not quite a teenager, I'm like using my allowance money to buy like K-Tel compilations that have like 22 tracks. So I'm getting a sampling of everything, because if you ever had one of those records, it's literally the gamut.
Yeah.
You get everything. I mean, the one album I had like started with Smoking in the Boys' Room, and then went on to like, you know, Sonny and Cher, Tony Orlando and Dawn, you know, all that stuff. But I would say that once I became sort of like at that age where you are then actively looking for something new, something different, it was definitely when punk and what they used to call new wave became a thing.
Yeah.
So early bands that I loved, and also looked at them in terms of like their musicality, because I'm starting to get an interest in like playing music.
Right.
So groups like The Police, The Clash, Blondie, The Cars, you know, those are Cheap Trick. Those are bands that, you know, you buy their records, and you pay more attention to like everybody in the band and how they play and how they look when they play.
Yeah.
And my first instrument was drums, so I was very taken by, you know, drummers like Stuart Copeland from The Police or Clem Burke from Blondie, who both arguably like overplayed everything. But Gina Shock from the Go-Go's, actually big inspiration. And so like I learned to just sort of like get my entry into playing music through like those kinds of bands, playing the drums. But there was also always this part of me that kind of knew that I wanted to write songs. That was always like the first goal. And so, you know, listening to, and another thing about punk rock is that it's very clear from listening to it that anybody can at least try to do it.
Right. Yes.
You're not like looking up at a god, like, you know.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like the Led Zeppelin in awe of everything.
Right.
It's like, oh, these guys suck, but it looks fun.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where my head was at as a teenager.
So you know, obviously, you know, those Caulfield albums, you know, I think the first one had 12, 13 songs. The L album had like 14 or 15 songs. So obviously rolling out songs was not a problem for you, you know, being prolific and being able to get material out. I'm interested. What is your creative process like, though? Are you somebody that could just get inspiration at any point of the day, or are you somebody that sets time aside to write? You have to have a certain ambiance. Do you go to a certain room in the house? Do you set that? You know, like what's your creative process like?
All right. Well, let me start by saying that you're right about the number of songs on those two albums, but
Yeah.
the writing of the second Caulfields album was not easy. In fact, I had a group of songs that I submitted in demo form for the second record that our A&R guy, like if it was like a fly, he would have just swatted it and crushed it.
Ouch. Oh.
Like he hated my first batch of songs. And I thank him for being so brutal with me because it was very like he knew, like, fellas, you're on a major label. This is do or die. Your second record is, and you know, we died anyway, but we made a great record.
Yeah.
But
You did.
in terms of like the process, and one of the things that I've had to learn this over and over again, because so much of what I started to want to identify myself with as a songwriter is like, I'm a guy who can just like, I can do this on my own.
Yeah.
And after getting my demos rejected for the second album, I started to co-write songs with my bandmates. And the 5 co-writes on the second Caulfields album are among my favorite songs on the record. And I think in sort of being willing to accept those other contributions and viewpoints, it opened the floodgates to my own mojo back. So I did write some really good songs by myself, but it took that collaboration to just feel like, oh, I haven't just completely lost it. Because a lot of songwriters go through that feeling like, oh, maybe I just don't have any more gas in the tank.
Yeah, maybe I'm out of songs. Yeah.
And every time I begin to think that, something happens. And to circle back to your question about like, what's the process like? The more intentional I am about it, the less productive I am. Like all my best ideas happen when I'm in the shower or driving in the car. Yeah. Or, you know, one of the things I said very often in my songwriting class as a piece of advice is be a good eavesdropper, because you never know, like you're going to be like at the mall in the food court or something and you'll overhear somebody say something and it'll just hit you like that's a line in a song, that's the title of a song, or the subject that they're talking about, like you relate to it in some way and you turn it into something. So I actually encourage songwriters, you know, don't just sit in a chair with your instrument necessarily and think that that's where inspiration is going to hit you. Go out and live your life. Go have a day, because you'll encounter something or see something during that day that's going to be the seed of the song. Much more likely. So, and I also tend to get inspired very quickly if I'm listening to records I love. Like if I really feel like I'm in a rut, I'll put on like the first Pretenders record. And within like 2 songs, I'm like, all right, I'm going to stop listening to this because I have my own ideas that I want to immediately start working on. So there's hacks you can use, but in general, like I just think you should just go live your life and have your antenna out.
That's good advice. That is good advice. No, that's good advice. So when you're, you know, when that first Caulfields album comes out, it's 1995. We're kind of, I guess we could still say we're still in the midst of that whole grunge wave. It's
the late period of it for sure. But you know, a lot of the bands that got signed are as a result of that happening.
So did you feel that pinch because that was so huge at that time? You know, did you just play to your strengths and do what you do, or was there any pressure, you know, from the label or from anybody to, you know, to kind of say, you know, geez, you need to sound this way because this is what's popular and what's selling right now?
I don't think we had pressure directly from the label. We had internal pressure to sound. Well, we always use the word competitive. It's what we're doing competitive with what's out there. And in some ways that, you know, there's a story in the book where we're in the studio like the first day of making Whirligig, and the drummer who was in the band at the time was playing Devil's Diary in a way that our bass player found too polite.
Yeah.
And he went into the studio, into the cutting room, tracking room, to like tell him, like, don't play the hi-hat in the introduction, like ride the crash cymbal, 'cause
Dirty it up a little. Yeah.
that's the true way to make something rock more, is to play it on the crash cymbal.
Yeah.
And the drummer said something really, like, he was like, why would I take advice from you? You didn't even graduate from college.
Ouch. Ouch. Jeez.
My bass player and I were just laughing about that this morning, because I'm like, that still stings.
Yeah. Were you a fan of that period? When all that grunge exploded, did you look at that as just like a stitch in time, or did you think and still think that some great bands came out of that?
I personally was definitely a fan.
Yeah.
Because because I was very into like what you would call alternative music in the period leading up to that.
Right.
So, it's been said a million times, like, you can't listen to Nevermind by Nirvana and not hear the Pixies.
Right. Right.
And so I was a fan of that, and I was like, oh, this is kind of like a more souped up version of that.
Yeah.
And the songs were great. I mean, Kurt Cobain, arguably, like, even something that's like so ubiquitous, like, one of the things that I used to do in my class, I would say, all right, we've heard this 80 million times, but I'm going to play you Smells Like Teen Spirit. I'm going to tell you why it's really good.
Yeah.
Because, and it all has to do with his note choices in the melody over those repeating 4 chords that keep going and going and going. Like, the way that melody sits against those chords is just not anything that like a typical songwriter would do.
Right.
There's too many rubs, and I was just like, this guy he was touched by something, what I mean? Like, he had just had it.
Very special. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was immediately a fan of theirs, and I had heard Bleach, which is the previous record as well. I don't think it was as good,
No.
there's a lot of people that
really rave about it.
People always like the first record by somebody, even if it's like, not literally.
I think it makes them feel like they got in before everybody else.
Exactly. And to be honest, like, I'm an even bigger fan of In Utero.
Oh, it's a great album.
Which was the next one. But like, a lot of the bands in that period, like, I mean, I will say this, like, I was never the biggest like Pearl Jam fan. I respect them, especially due to their longevity, and but my joke to the like my friends who all love Pearl Jam is like, when Vitology came out and Corduroy is the first track on that record, I was like, oh, they finally wrote a good one. Just to be a dick. But like another band, Soundgarden, loved that band. Like really, really, just like, so I mean, clearly, as time goes on, and we're now like 30 years past this period, maybe 10 years ago, like, that music sounded a little crusty in some ways. But now, as we all know, things are so cyclical. There's now like a nostalgia wave for that kind of stuff. A very close friend of mine plays in a Chris Cornell tribute band, and they regularly sell out like theaters. And I'm like, this is like a real hunger that people have.
A big topic today I noticed when I was on social media was that and I don't even know if this means anything to artists anymore. I think it does to some, and some have kind of poo-pooed it is not that big of a deal. But the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame list came out today, and a lot of people were outraged that there is no Soundgarden, going in. And I saw that it was a big point of contention with a lot of people today on social media, because everybody got announced, and Rage Against the Machine was on there. And while there were people that said, they should go in, they also only had 3 albums. I did, and I could certainly see where people are making the Soundgarden point, especially when you're seeing other people going in from the R&B and hip hop world. And I had no problem with those people going in or giving them their own hall. But I mean, there's been a lot of great people that have been left out of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Well, my attitude is this, like, who cares?
Yes. And I think that's starting to become a lot of artists' attitude about it.
Because like anything else, like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is just a group of self-appointed tastemakers,
Yes.
gatekeepers that
Yep.
are making decisions based on their own tastes.
Yes.
It's all subjective.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
so look, I'm not gonna like be disingenuous and say I would turn it down if I were somehow to get in. Like, everybody loves to be validated.
Sure.
But if you're not going to be validated by the gatekeepers, you know, I'm sure Rage Against the Machine, whose T-shirt I'm actually wearing currently,
Representing.
Soundgarden, like whoever doesn't get in, they have millions of fans.
Sure.
And that's where you're, as an artist, like I believe and advocate for, like that's where your true sense of validation should lie.
Yeah.
First with yourself and what is your motivation for doing it? And if you are lucky enough to have that number of people care about your music,
Right.
then who gives a shit if you ever get a Grammy or ever get, you know, voted into something where it's, you know, literally a self-appointed committee of people.
Right. And you make a good point. I think having the validation of the people is a lot better too. You know, I mean, having that stamp of approval from fans, look, you know, the album buyers out there, you know, those are the people that are putting it in your coffers. You know, I mean,
look, I understand that there's nuance to this. Like every artist wants to feel accepted.
Right.
One of the reasons, you know, by nature, it's a fairly insecure group.
Right.
Artists.
Yeah.
So if somebody, no matter who it is indicating that I see you, I like what you do, you're going to feel good about that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
You can't let that define everything about you. And look, I'm sure that for the guys in Rage and in Soundgarden, the surviving members, like even seeing an outcry from your fans has to be somehow like a good deal.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, I don't see any of them being like particularly upset that they didn't get in.
Right.
It's the fans who are so invested in these bands that they love. They're kind of like getting mad by proxy.
Right. Yeah.
Which is their right as passionate fans. And
yeah.
You know, that's kind of, as an artist, that's what you would want to see. Like,
the rallying cry. Yeah, you want to see the rallying cry go up. Yeah, sure. So the yin and the yang of it all, rock and roll memories from the cusp as told by a mixed race kid. That's a mouthful, but you know, I love this book, but what was the impetus for writing it? You know, is this something that you thought of? Was this someone that gave you a spark or an idea to do this?
The impetus was the passing of my mom in 2012. I have spent most of my adult life being told by my friends who have heard almost all the stories that I tell in the book, like, only you, John, you should write a book about this. Yeah. So it's always been in my head for a pretty long time. But when my mom died, and it's a very specific moment, we're at her funeral. We were out in Oregon where she was living when she passed away. And you know how like they'll hand you like a little remembrance card. So my brother-in-law Randy very kindly put together like a bigger thing. It was like it was like 2 pieces of paper folded in half. So it was like a 4-page little booklet thing that they handed out. And even with that, as I was reading it, and as much as I acknowledge and am grateful for the fact that he did this, I was reading it. I was like, man, there's so much more to Mom than this. And obviously you can't tell that story in that form, in that place and setting. I understand that. But it started to get me thinking, like, I would like to, as my own, and you know, I wrote songs, obviously, as a result of her passing. But one of the things that I started thinking about was, you know, her story, her personal story is incredible. And I really only scratched the surface of it in the book. But I kind of realized that if I could somehow tell my story, which is so interwoven with hers and her influence on me, then maybe that's a way that I, as her son, can honor her. So in some ways, that's sort of the initial motivation for getting it started. And then it took 5 years after that thought to actually get the balls to try it.
Yeah, yeah. I imagine it's quite the undertaking. You know what I mean? You know, having to put your life down, you know, on paper, you know, I mean.
Well, not only are you putting your life down on paper, but you're interrupting the whole rest of your life. I mean,
Right.
It took 6 years to write, you know, from the first sentence that I wrote in the book to being able to hold it in my hand. It was a 6-year period.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
During that time, I was still teaching, which is a very sort of consuming thing. You know,
Yeah.
when you have like 60 kids in a term and you're grading 60 things every time they turn something in, it's a lot. And so I had to balance all that with trying to focus on writing a book. And at a certain point, which is one of the handful of reasons that I left the job at the end of like 2021, or beginning of 2021, was because I had already worked on this thing for years and I saw no light at the end of the tunnel. And I was like, I'm starting to feel like the boy who cried wolf here.
Yeah.
Like I've been talking about this book for all these years and I'm still not that close. So I had to quit the job and basically like live off potatoes for 2 years.
Yeah.
To just be able to dedicate the time, you know. So it was a big undertaking, and I feel like a real sense of accomplishment that I even did it, regardless of how far the book goes or how many people read it. But luckily for me, the reaction's been really great so far.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm certainly enjoying the audio experience of it. You know, I think that, and again, I mentioned this earlier. I think when you tell your story in your own words and in your own voice, you really know where to add those inflections and the emphasis, and you know, it's you telling the story. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think that bears a lot on of you know, it adds a lot of relevancy to the story. You know,
I appreciate that. Yeah, I agree. Like I think that. And plus, I lived within these words and sentences,
right,
like, in a way that is probably unhealthy.
Yeah.
for years. So I know every little accent and little lift in my voice that I wanted to have.
Yeah.
Because no chapter in the writing process was truly done until I read it out loud and it sounded right.
Right. And one part of the book that I find really poignant, though, and maybe you can explain this to people who might not be familiar with the book, at the point where your father passes away and your mother comes out and kind of hands you, and forgive me for not knowing, a bag or some kind of thing and says, you know, here, get to know your father. What did she mean by that? And what did you unearth, you know, in this bag, you know, that she wanted you to find out?
Sure. Well, the context of all that is that when my father died, I was kept in the dark.
Okay.
So not only did I not even really know he had cancer, but after, like, he was dead before I knew it.
Yeah.
And I wasn't told that he was dead until after the fact.
Yeah.
And when his funeral came up, I was sort of very quietly walked two houses down in my neighborhood and left there while people were gathering at my house to remember him. So kind of being cut out of all of those opportunities to grieve, that kind of messed me up, I'll be honest.
Sure. Yeah.
And I know in my heart that my mom was just trying to protect me. And I just think that it was a bad miscalculation on her part in doing that. And I don't have anger at her towards that, but I know very deeply how it affected me.
Right.
And so when she hands me this bag, it's literally about 2 decades after the man is gone.
Yeah.
And I don't know if she forgot she had it.
Yeah.
One thing about my mom, no context.
Yeah.
So
Just here, this will catch you up to speed.
Yeah, well, and so yeah, it's like literally like a black document bag. Like you could tell it was old because the zipper, like the teeth in the zipper are like those thick. You know, when you're undoing it, it's like
right. It's like you're opening up a dossier on your father, like
a dossier. Yeah, exactly. So, what was the contents of this bag was fascinating to me because my father was somebody who lived a very interesting life as a young man. I mean, okay, so further context, he's born in 1904.
Okay.
He would be 119 this year.
Yeah.
And he was very athletic and, so he played numerous sports at a fairly high level. He was a semi-pro baseball and football player. He was a boxer.
Oh, nice.
For money.
Nice. Yeah.
And a lot of, so I saw all these clippings. They would be like little newspaper clippings.
Yeah.
Some of them he had laminated and some of them are still sitting there over, like practically 100 years old. And they're just like these yellow, very, very delicate newspaper clippings. And so I began to learn about who he was as a young man because I was never told anything.
Right.
I wasn't alive long enough to get to that point where you ask your dad, like, what was it like when you were a boy, Dad?
Right.
I was 6.
Right.
So if I, when I started to think about these things, I'm like, well, he's born in 1904. So by the time he's like a teenager, it's like World War I, and then he's 25 when the Depression hits. And so like, how is he functioning in this world?
Right.
And he had to, like, from all accounts, he kind of like was a young hustler in a way, like doing whatever he could, which is why I think he did so many sports. It was just like, well, I gotta try to like make myself into something.
Yeah.
And that was a piece of him that I really connected with unexpectedly.
Yeah.
And the fact that he saved all this shit, like, this was his bag.
Yeah.
This is my memorabilia here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah.
And I was like, who does this remind you of, John? Oh, don't you have a bag that's got like your, hey, the Caulfields are playing this Tuesday night at the Deer Park.
You've got your own dossier.
Yeah. And I was like, well, isn't that interesting? To see that maybe that's actually a point where like we are truly connected by more than blood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's a personality trait that we share.
Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty wild. And then of course, other things in the bag, which came to be like much more significant in recent times. So there were 2 photographs of his kids from his first marriage.
Okay.
Who nobody said a word about. And so his son, I came to find out, is also named John.
Oh, okay.
My father's name was John. He named his first son John. He named me John. Are you sensing a George Foreman scenario here?
Yeah, I kind of am. Yeah.
And I asked I held the picture up. I was like, Mom, who's this?
Yeah.
And she's like, well, that's your father's son. I was like, well, what's his name? And if my mom could do a version of like, just sort of like, John. And so it's just kind of like, that kind of stuff just like makes you wonder. And the cool thing is, and this didn't end up in the book because it was outside the realm of the time period I was covering, but I actually met my half brother, John, for the first time last year.
Wow.
He's 78. He is a funny motherfucker.
Yeah, that's great though that you were able to connect with him though.
Yeah. So his daughter, who is technically my niece, and yet we are the same age.
Yes.
Found me on Facebook, and it was actually on Father's Day that we spoke for the first time.
That's
and
awesome.
I've had the opportunity to see him in person maybe four times since then, and to hear about his life, to like the whole world of my father has opened up as a result of getting to know him.
Yeah.
And it's not all great.
Right. But whose life is, right? I mean,
no, absolutely. I mean, and I know that my brother has his own issues with my dad. One of which is that my father apparently never divorced my brother's mom before marrying my mom.
Oh, a little scandal in the family, huh?
Little bigamy going on there.
Yeah.
So, and that's one of the things that I kind of came to realize, with both my parents through writing the book, is that I think for most of us, we don't really see our parents as like whole human beings,
right,
until pretty far down the line in our own lives.
Yeah.
I agree
with
they're
that.
just the people that are supposed to like take care of me and like,
right.
They don't have a life,
Right.
And how wrong that is, their lives, I wrote a book about my own life. If I was their biographer, their lives are infinitely more interesting than mine has been.
Yeah. All of a sudden you come to find out your dad is stuck in boxing and he's a bigamist and all this cool shit.
Yeah, right. If you can remove yourself emotionally from it being your dad, it's fascinating.
Yeah. All of a sudden you find out, geez, this guy's a hell of a fucking renegade here.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Also learned that he was like a Philadelphia cop who, and like, you're not from Philly, so this may not resonate with you, but he was friends on the police force with this guy, Frank Rizzo, who was eventually the mayor of Philadelphia.
Okay.
And a very divisive figure.
Okay.
Philadelphians either love Frank or they hate Frank, but my dad was in cahoots with Frank.
Yeah. A little bit of
yeah. And that to me I was just like, oh my God. Like, what else?
So musically now, are you still doing stuff with the Caulfields or just solo stuff right now?
I mean, we just had my book release event last week in Philly, and Caulfields were a major part of that.
Okay.
So one thing that we say as a band, and I reiterate this every time in case somebody starts, thinking otherwise, is that we are a band that is defunct. Even if we play an occasional gig, we're not trying to write new records. We all have like our own creative lives outside of that. Right. And there have been numerous reasons for us to get together over the past couple of years, because both the records had their 25th anniversary years. Right. And so we felt like we wanted to do something to celebrate that. And, with the book coming out, I wanted them to be part of what I'm doing with the book. And there may be other opportunities to do a show here and there where I'm telling stories from the book and we're playing the songs as the Caulfields. That's something that I actually do want to do. But in terms of being an active band, that's a hard no. Like, I don't want to make new records necessarily. And it's not that I wouldn't enjoy it, but it's like, I've had my own thing for 20 plus years.
Right.
After the Caulfields, numerous bands, there's like 3 or 4 different things that I've done since then. And almost more than anything else, that has truly taken a back seat while I've written the book and celebrated all these Caulfields anniversaries. And that's something that I really want to get back to. Yeah. Because I've been sitting on like an album's worth of songs that I want to do. Right. I want to record them. I want to figure out the best way to put them out. And I want to have that current part of my musical life to be back on the front burner. Right. Now, you mentioned your father playing baseball. I don't know how much of a fan of baseball you are. I am a huge New York Mets fan. Obviously you can tell I have a very quiet co-host, the great Keith Hernandez back there. Nice. And, every once in a while, Keith Hernandez, he won't speak up, but I do allow him liberties from time to time where I will let him submit questions. And he would like to know Keith Hernandez would like to any pre-show rituals that you have. Now, Keith's pre-show ritual before a baseball game was a handful of amphetamines and a couple lines of blow, particularly off a stripper's ass. But sometimes you can't get that in a baseball clubhouse. No, and he would always make sure that
and he would always make sure that he would put his left cleat on first. I don't know what that means, but
A little superstitious. Yeah.
Yeah. Any pre-show rituals for you?
Yeah, I do actually. I write about
You
this.
can't get not lines of blow and the handfuls of amphetamine.
No, that's the thing. It's like everything about me on the surface is the least rock and roll thing on earth.
That's why you're still alive.
Which is why I'm still alive, and I think I have a pretty good perspective on things. But my pre-show ritual is that I cut up pineapples so that I can have them to eat on stage.
Really?
Yes, because they're great for your voice.
No kidding.
Yeah,
there you go, kids out there. There's a tip. There's your tip for the day right there.
This is your little vocal hack. I was a vocal coach for a pretty long time.
Yeah, who knew this was going to take an educational turn?
Well, there's a thing in pineapple called bromelain, which is a known anti-inflammatory.
Okay.
And I was actually given this, but I had like a minor surgery a few years back, and the doctor was like, "Oh, and go to the drugstore and get some bromelain. It's like a natural anti-inflammatory."
Sure.
And I was like, "Oh, well, what's that?" He was like, "Well, it's an extract from pineapples." I was like, "Interesting."
Yeah.
And then
it's interesting.
I started to do a little more research because there was a period like maybe around 2010, 2011. When I was actually in a band I was in called Ike, was having some vocal problems, like because we were a band that still toured, and I would be sort of in the situation where it might be like 4 shows in 5 nights or something, and I started to like get a little
Sure.
So short of like the true fail safe, which is a handful of prednisone, so that'll work fast. But in absence of that. Pineapple is a great way to treat your voice. In advance of playing. There's just something about it.
I do work in healthcare. My day job is as a nurse. So yes, I do know the benefits of prednisone. Absolutely.
Yes. Well,
yeah. Very good steroid out there. And it usually will bring down inflammation, and it will treat you right. Don't want to be on it a long time, but it will treat you right for a short course.
In a big emergency in Atlanta that year that I discovered the whole pineapple thing. Went to a doctor. They were like, just take like, this, like a prednisone pack is like a triangle of pills. You take like 7 the first day, 6.
And
then it goes down. So he's like, just take 7 of these pills and see how you feel in like 2 hours. And unbelievably, I sang the whole show like note perfect after that. This was going from not being able to talk. It was nuts.
And so now that I want to let the cat out of the bag. DNA testing is not where we want it to be yet, but I think it's pretty obvious that that I have a lineage here to Diamond Dave. I mean, you can see it, can't you?
I see it very clearly.
And so, and so my next question would be, because I'm thinking of doing some teaching too, not so much about the voice, but just the whole persona of how to be a front man. Any room for a course like that at Drexel?
You would have to ask them.
Okay, fair enough.
Fair
enough.
I actually, one of the things, so in addition to teaching at Drexel, I was also a rock school band coach.
Oh, that's cool.
And that is something that I talked about a lot, because I'd be like, kids, you can't just stand there while you're playing.
Right.
Let's let's make this into a thing here.
Right.
So that is, I mean, I think that you hit upon a very good point with, like once you decide that you're stepping on a stage, you're performing.
But people are there to see a performance. They're not just necessarily there to see you sing. Like, obviously, Diamond Dave, just to use him an example, the kicks, the splits, the running around, all that stuff, a whole persona.
To this day, I do not care about anything about Van Halen if it is after Diamond Dave.
Thank you.
Like,
me too.
When let me tell you something. When Women and Children first came out, this was like 78 or 9.
Yep, you're right.
When I heard, have you seen Junior's grades on the radio?
It's a game changer.
Who's that guy?
Yeah,
it's a game changer. I need to know about this band. Yeah. And, man, they're a band that like doesn't get enough credit. In a lot of ways, like those first like 4 records are just unbelievable.
They are. Yeah.
And Fair Warning, in my opinion, was like the best one. Like
an amazing album.
Love it.
Yeah, an amazing album.
And I, you know, I mean, obviously, like people know who Van Halen is, but like they kind of get left out of the conversation sometimes with like great rock bands.
Right. Now the tough question that I like to end with, and I got to hold your feet to the flames here. Your desert island pick. You're stranded there, and you can only take one goddamn album with you. Do you have one?
Back in Black.
Back in Black.
Yep.
AC/DC's Back in Black is what John is going to be listening to on his deserted island.
And I will do it happily.
Wow. And now why? Are you able to elaborate as to why?
There's just something so, you know, as a songwriter, I appreciate songs and music on so many different levels, but there's something about Back in Black that is primal to me.
Yeah, it is. Brian Johnson's first foray into the band. Yep.
Yeah. And if I got to be on a desert island, that's as primal as it gets.
Yeah.
You need a commensurate soundtrack to that.
You're gonna be there listening to Back in Black, and you're gonna be having your machete and you're just shucking your pineapples.
I would almost like air drum with the machete.
Yeah.
You know?
And maybe you'd get some pineapples carved up too.
See, it all works out.
That's great pineapple carving music.
I couldn't agree more.
It really is. So people can find the book where? Anywhere they sell fucking books, right?
Well, just go to Amazon and here's the easiest route to finding the book, so you don't have to remember. Okay. Just go to johnfaye.com, JOHNFAYE. The landing page is all the links to either Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org. You can order it online from any of those places.
Fair enough. I'm enjoying it. I'm not all the way through it yet. I'm about 2/3 of the way through it. I love it so far, man. So kudos, man, for just writing an awesome book. And I appreciate you coming on here and doing this. This was a lot of fun chatting with you. It really was.
I have had a blast. Thank you so much for having me, man.
Yeah, thanks. And hopefully we can keep in touch and we can do it again sometime soon. And when I put your episode up, I will send you the link and feel free to share it wherever you will.
I absolutely will. Great to talk to you, man.
Yes, thanks again, John. I really appreciate it. And best of luck with everything going forward.
Thank you.
All right. Talk to you soon, buddy. Thank you.
See ya.
Later. There he goes, folks. That is John KIM FAYE. You might know him from a little band back in the 90s called the CAULFIELDS. Put out 2 really catchy, kick-ass albums. 1995's Whirligig. 1997's album was called L, which I know a little something about because all I deal with on here are legends. So I know a little something about the letter L. And he has just written his memoir, which is fucking awesome. I would certainly implore people to go listen to the audiobook version, which John narrates and does a hell of a good job on. Super entertaining. The book is called The Yin and Yang of It All. Rock and roll memories from the cusp, as told by a mixed-up, mixed-race kid. You will not be upset for going to listen to this book. Keith, you enjoyed that? And I got your question in. Your ridiculous question about his pre-show ritual. You didn't have to add that yours was a handful of amphetamines, cigarettes, and lines of blow, and putting on your left cleat first, of course. But we shared that with John, and he seemed to understand. And divulged to us that his pre-show ritual is cutting up pineapples for his throat. So PodScum was also educational today, kids. Singers out there, try that. I don't need it because I'm naturally blessed and I have the Roth lineage. But for singers out there trying to make it, a little pineapple for the throat ain't going to hurt nothing. Unless, of course, you can get yourself your hands on a little bit of prednisone. But that is John KIM FAYE. Go back and check out those Caulfields albums, man. They are great, catchy, killer anthemic rock songs. Do yourself a favor, go back and check that out, and definitely check out John's book, man. It's a good one. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode as much as I enjoyed chopping it up with John. And remember, until we meet and do this thing again, remember to take it easy and keep it sleazy.